Our last virtual retreat within our learning community, one of our members brought up a really heart-rending question for them about their business. And it feels a little complicated and messy, and I've wanted to get at it for a few weeks, and I'm realizing I'm just going to talk about it messy. This is Mark Silver with Heart of Business, and the topic has to do with when you are volunteering, giving a significant amount of your time to some kind of a community that you belong to. It may be spiritual or religious, it may be another kind of community organization. And the member in our community that brought this up was really torn up around it because they loved their community. They loved this community that they belonged to. They loved the experience of giving time to it. They loved interacting with everyone. They loved helping out in this way. They felt like it was a good and worthy and important thing to do. At the same time, it was taking a lot of time and energy. The commitment was a very high-level commitment, and it was exhausting. And she was finding herself without a lot of rest time and not a lot of creative time for her own business, for her work. And it wasn't a simple question. And about like, oh, well, just quit the community or pull back, because the way it was structured for her to pull back would leave a vacuum, would leave that, something's not getting done that feels important to get done. A lot of people I know are in this position. And the crux of our conversation was taking on this understanding that a lot of things that we call community aren't really communities. They're not really communities. Not in a deep and abiding and nourishing sense. In our culture, in Western culture, we don't know how to do healthy community. We've lost it. Colonialism and white supremacy and patriarchy and all of these terrible systems of superiority have destroyed our connection with our indigenous roots, whatever part of the world you come from. I'm personally from Eastern Europe. My family comes from there, and I have, pretty much zero connection to indigenous ways of being with community. Now, the reason this is important, and this is not about idolizing, indigenous communities can be unhealthy too. It's not about that, but there was a way before capitalism, outside of capitalism, where communities had generations and generations and generations to work through problems, to figure out like, okay, how do we collectively do childcare and raise kids? How do we do elder care? How do we do medicine? How do we do the productive work that cares for everyone? And how do we deal with conflict? How do we, when somebody has to, when we want someone to give time and energy to an important part of the community, but it's not about food, or survival, how does that person be cared for? And there's many, many different answers to this from many different parts of the globe, right? Depending on the agriculture, depending on all of this stuff, on the culture and et cetera. There's many different solutions to this. There's not just one way. But what is notably absent in Western culture, in a lot of these volunteer communities, is that there isn't an acknowledgement that these communities are not encompassing. Meaning that you might give time to support the organization, but the organization rarely has the resources or the people to support you in the way that you've been supported. So for instance, in village life, if someone was designated to kind of care for the temple or the spiritual, this was an example from a spiritual community, so I'm kind of leaning into that. It doesn't have to be spiritual, but somebody's given responsibility, or some handful of people given responsibility for caring for the temple and the spiritual life, and just helping to hold that, then other people in the village, in that community, will give food to the temple so those people can live, right? The equivalent in our traumatized, broken culture is there isn't an equivalent. There might be some honorarium or some very low rate of pay, but often there's nothing. Often it's just giving without, like the receiving back is all internal in terms of good feelings and knowing you have an effect and knowing you're being of service, which is beautiful, but it's not connected to the rest of your life in that way, in terms of being able to really support you. And because of this, many organizations ask for commitments that aren't really sustainable in modern life. I'm not wanting to blame those organizations. I'm just saying that that's true. I have seen this so many times. And I myself have been a part of this also, where we're asked to give hours each week that we just don't have, that require other things to fall off. Now, am I making a pitch to not give to organizations? No, I'm not. I want us to care. There are local good community organizations that need support and that we get a tremendous amount back from. And because this dynamic is often unacknowledged, I just want to acknowledge it. That if you have a commitment to a I say so-called community, not because there's anything wrong or bad about that community or organization in particular, but because it's not an encompassing community in the way that I think community really means, where it really is, a collective whole that has a way of dealing with all the different aspects of life and not just a siloed, separate section, See, it's a little messy, and my thoughts are a little unformed also. But I wanted to acknowledge this dynamic, and I want to invite you to acknowledge this dynamic, that the commitments that any organization that you're a part of may be asking from you in a volunteer way may be unconsciously on their part unsustainable levels of commitment. I just want that to sink in. And the truth of the fact that the commitment is unsustainable doesn't mean that the organization isn't worthy of support. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't give and you shouldn't show up to help and to be a part of it. Because all of that gets tangled together in ways that are really unhealthy. Oh, you're saying that the organization is toxic and we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. No, I'm just saying that we need to acknowledge that a lot of these volunteer commitments are set at unsustainable levels. And so what I'm inviting you to do is to hold the care that you have for this organization or community that you may be a part of. Hold the care that you have for your own life and for your business, and see the care that you have for all of it. One of the things that I say quite often is that prioritization doesn't mean just getting rid of things that aren't important. Sometimes there are things that are really good and worthy of care and attention that we just don't have bandwidth for. And so in acknowledging the truth of your capacity and the truth that maybe your business needs more care than it's getting, and that it's good and worthy of care also, that you can start to look at the commitments you have, volunteer commitments you have to communities and organizations, and reassess them in light of your whole life, and make perhaps a painful but healthy choice not to cut off your connection to those organizations, but to scale them back to a sustainable level. Because if they're truly important to you, you want to be giving to them at a level that you can sustain for a long time. Because if you give at an unsustainable level and your business suffers and you struggle yourself, and this is all a function of a really unhealthy capitalist system that we live within, but it is what it is, that if you can scale back your commitments to something that is sustainable, even if things go undone, even if there are vacuums left in the organization, that you'll be able to show up for your own life and for this organization in a much healthier way. And maybe your business has a better chance of thriving. Maybe you have a better chance of thriving and caring for yourself and your clients. And maybe the organization, in acknowledging what is a sustainable level of contribution, for you at least, might help shift the entire organizational culture towards something healthier as well. All right, this feels more like the beginning of a conversation rather than like a simple how-to. But this is the invitation I wanted to offer you today. And yeah, I'm curious how it lands and what you notice, if it resonates. All right, blessings to you, your business, and your community organizations. Peace.